Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, and one of the unexpected dramas of this tour has been hitting the odd area of organization. We had one to start with. We were spoiled at the beginning, as at one point, in a fit of organizational fury, I put all of my ancient world classics together, or most of them, for the Western classics. So we had a lot of thematic unity in the first month or so of this tour, and that hasn't been the rule. I don't think it's going to be the rule going on, but I noticed this week that we are hitting Russian classics. So at some point or other, I must have either built out that shelf with new acquisitions or moved some things around, but I know that it's not complete. When we leave this batch of today's books are by a Russian master, and when we leave this batch of Russian masters, whenever that happens, I know that we will encounter others along the way, and the books today tell me that that is true, because the Russian master today is Ivan Turgenev, and I have the Penguin Classic of his play, A Month in the Country. This is the much lauded translation by Isaiah Berlin with an introduction by the same person. Just a thin little thing, just a play. I don't know why we would call it that. It's not, I mean, it has a long theatrical tradition, but I don't think it's successful as a play at all, and Turgenev didn't either. He considered it to be a dramatized novel or a dramatized short story, rather than a play with lots of prose elements involved. And he was forever, I mean, he was a humble man. Odd for such a towering writer. He was a humble man, and spent the whole of his life. He was born in 1818. He died, I don't know, 15 years before the end of the 19th century. So he saw the whole golden age of Russian literature. And he spent all of that time saying that nobody should really bother to read this or stage it or act in it. He called it a comedy. There's nothing funny about it. It's the story of a woman, Natalia Petrovna, who well, the dark, bottomless black hole of her ultimate motivation for any of the things that she does in the country house setting of this play, I think is a matter for scholars, or for every reader of this play, to determine on their own why she does what she does, why she sets in motion such an acrimonious love triangle as she does in this play. I don't know that the author gives us any one particular scheme of her motivation. I think there's a lot that you can read into it, a lot of ambiguity that you can play with. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so popular. Plus, it's rattlingly good to read. I'm not sure why Turgenev would call it a comedy, but one way or another, once it received its proper treatment on the stage, which didn't happen overnight, but once it did, largely because of one particular electrifying stage actress, who so much brought A Month in the Country to life, despite the maiming that had been done to it by the Russian censors, that the author fell in love with her, despite the fact that he was about 180 years older than she was. He fell in love with her innocently, but head over heels. And he had a problem with that. Love is the chains, the ordeals of love is the central theme, if you want to call it that, of everything this author wrote. And it's definitely present in this play as well. And he went on his whole life sort of downplaying the significance of this, but he also downplayed the significance of everything he wrote, because he was, as I said, a rather humble man. And Isaiah Berlin does a really entertaining job here. I tend to agree with the author that this is not actually functionally a stage drama at all, no more so than any of the boutique dramas that you can point to in the rest of Western literary history. I've never seen it on stage many times, and I've never seen it work. So I think the author may have been right. But I have A Month in the Country. The Isaiah Berlin introduction has been anthologized separately from his translation. His translation is also much renowned. I'm glad that Penguin has it. I'm glad that's the one that I have. And I also have Spring Tarts. Same author, much later in his life. This is translated with notes by Professor Leonard Shapiro, who endears me to himself immediately. This is a full-blown novel. This is not a play with lots and lots of stage direction, and that's how you always know. That's how you always know when you're dealing with an author who just didn't write a short story or novella for whatever reason, usually monetary. Because as fans of Henry James's career will know, you could make a packet of money if you had a hit play. That wasn't true of a short story. So, but one way or another, this is definitely a novel, and it's once again about the torment of love. It's about a young man who falls in love and decides to alter the entire course of his life because of it, without knowing how it will turn out, without knowing if it's a good idea or not. The only person in the narrative who knows that it's a bad idea is the author. And Shapiro's translation is wonderful. It's really, really good. Better, I would heretically say, than anything that Berlin translated. But he endears himself to me in another way, because he has a brief note at the beginning of this thing. This is a Penguin Classic volume. You would expect that it would go along the program of a Penguin Classic volume or an Oxford Classic or Bantam or Signet, which is that you would have a big chunk of an introduction that puts the work in front of you, puts it in its context, hopefully does a less than soporific job, and then you launch onto the work, and then you get some notes in the back. And this has some notes in the back, and it has the work in a really good, sparkling at some points translation. But it barely has anything in the way of an introduction. And the author endears himself to me because in his introduction he says it would be nothing short of vandalism for a translator to tack on a boring introduction to a work as vital as this. He says in his, if I remember correctly, he says in his introduction, a few brief remarks from me are fine, but just go right on to the work and enjoy it. You're going to love it. And that is both humble, because that is the correct proportion of relationship between a translator and the work they translate, and also a little bit on the swaggery side in a way that I kind of like, because he's talking about his translation of this work. He's not telling you in those introductory remarks to go and find the Russian. He's telling you that he has done a good enough job to sweep you away, and I like that. I think it's true. You will see much more closely in Spring Torrents than in A Month in the Country the continental influence on Turgenev. He spent a lot of time outside of Russia, a lot of time, and he soaked up the arts world, knew lots of figures in the arts world, in a way that a lot of his great contemporaries did not, chose not to, or could not. And that, I think, shows in his work, very much so. I mean, you've got Dostoevsky translating Balzac and studying Georges Sand, but I see those authors and a lot of other authors a lot more clearly in Turgenev than I do in any other Russian. I don't think that's a groundbreaking thing to say, but the reason why I say that I am sure that we're going to encounter other Russian classics is because on the shelf, when I was letting my fingers do the walking for today's Penguin Classic, these are the Turgenevs that I found. And you don't have to know anything at all about this author to know that something is missing, that something is missing. A Month in the Country is wonderful as an experience. I think more wonderful to read on the page than it would be for you to spend money and go and see. But you never know. I mean, I'm in the minority there. Thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have seen some version of A Month in the Country on stage and loved it. And Spring Torrents is a really good, really passionate 19th century novel about love and its dangers. But neither one of them, I mean, no offense to Turgenev and no offense to his scholars, but neither one of them constitutes one of those, what I mentioned yesterday, one of those towering, emblematic Russian novels, or Russian works of literature, something like Eugene Onegin, something like Crime and Punishment. And that's not from want of trying. That's not because this author didn't write one of those. He did. He wrote Fathers and Sons. And it's not with these two, but I am certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I have a Penguin Classic of Fathers and Sons. So we will hit other Russians. Even when we're done with this vein of Russians, we will hit others. But in the meantime, of course, your Penguins are recommends today. I recommend this author if you haven't made his acquaintance. If you're, for instance, a lot of people go through the experience with Russian classics of going at it through Everest and K2 first. You get Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and it's a while, if ever, that you get to the lesser brooded, the lesser ballyhooed Russian authors. So you may not have read any Turgenev, and you should. You absolutely should. He is wonderful. Far less portentous than a lot of his fellows. Far less affected in all but his less guarded moments, and infinitely human, infinitely so. As usual in this March of the Penguins, I was tempted when I pulled these things down to just reread, but I can't allow myself to do that. I'd say once every 10 Penguins, I'm losing the battle and just rereading chunks or the whole. But I have huge amounts of reading to do, so I can't do that. So I'm going to put these back on the shelf, and we'll move on tomorrow. But although I'm pretty sure, just from what we've seen so far, that tomorrow will be a Russian, it won't be Turgenev because I looked for him, and he is not anywhere. Fathers and Sons is not anywhere visible. Nor are I would probably have a couple of his others in Penguin Classic as well, and they're not visible either. So we will be encountering him again somewhere down the line. Who knows where? So I'll wrap this up for now, and we'll see who comes up tomorrow. Do svidaniya.